Hi, this podcast is recorded on Gadigal land. Lee and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this place and also the custodians of the place where you're listening, wherever you are. Lee Sales?
Yes.
I have read the most magnificent book.
Yes.
That made me cry like violently while I read it. Now, do you ever sob when
Yep.
you're reading books?
Yeah, not very
I don't
often, but I
really
do.
very often. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to read books by Paul Gallico, and there's this one called Jenny about this boy who somehow turns into a cat. And then,
you've mentioned that before, yeah.
And I remember getting to the end because then as a cat he falls in love with this other cat called Jenny, and also he makes the discovery that mice are actually delicious. So it's just it's a kid's book, but there's sort of a bit of a sad ending.
Oh.
And I remember just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing.
Oh.
Anyway, I read this book. It's not a very long book by a writer called Susie Boyd. My friend Sebastian, who you know, recommended it, and she is one of the children of Lucian Freud.
Oh.
So Lucian Freud had a lot of children and wasn't around for all of them. He had children with lots of different mums. This is the figurative painter Lucian Freud, also descendant of Sigmund Freud. Anyway, this writer, Susie Boyd, I've not read before. This is like her 7th novel or something, and it's called Loved and Missed. And the story is about a woman called Ruth. She's an English teacher at a girls' school, and she has one daughter who is a heroin addict. And she was a single parent to this daughter, Eleanor, and the action starts with Eleanor already grown up and almost estranged. So living in a sort of squat, and Ruth has lost her. And Eleanor has a baby that Ruth then kind of takes on because it's just Eleanor and her partner are just not really up to it. And so she then has a second life as a mother with Eleanor's daughter, whose name is Lily. And so as the book goes on, and Lily, the child, gets older, and it visits all of these, very Freudian parenting kind of areas, absent fathers, and the obligations of parenthood. It's upsetting and piercing, but also such beauty on every page. And the really interesting thing about Ruth as a character is that she's extremely conflicted about her daughter. So she loves her daughter with this sort of savage passion and will not give up on her. So she's, makes a turkey every Christmas, and the daughter doesn't turn up or turns up stoned, and she's takes food around, is just never ever giving up. And yet she kind of grits her teeth and despises the daughter as well. So there's this complicated maternal load and guilt and worry that is always on her. There's a sense of this heaviness always that's on her, and a fear of where she is and will she get the call and so on. And then as the child Lily grows up, Ruth then takes on the burden of protecting the child against the callousness of her mother.
Right.
And so she's a mother to this tiny girl, and also she's protecting the little girl from the fact that her mother is not that sort of around.
Right.
And then as the Lily grows older, she starts protecting her grandmother against, oh my God.
Oh.
It's piercing. And
American writer? Or?
No, British.
Oh, British, right.
And it's not a long book, but this hardly ever happens to me. But towards the end, there's other ins and outs as well of the story, including Ruth's circle of female friends who kind of crush in to support her when various things happen, which I won't kind of give away. But towards the end, I found myself just like gasping with tears, like actually sobbing.
Oh.
There's such a tension, but such a, I don't know, I guess it's a study of human obligation and love and desire to protect the people you love from the realities of life, which are that shocking things happen, that, you know, painful things will definitely come, and that sometimes that the people that you love will kind of let you down or you'll let them down.
It's particularly tricky, I think, when it involves children because some things in life you actually cannot protect children from because it's the reality of just what happens. So you can't protect children from everything because they are going to know some things. And sometimes people have things happen to them earlier in life than, you know, some people live to 60 before their mum dies and some people live to 6. Yeah. And so, you know, you can't always protect everyone to the degree that you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the thing, I guess, that is, this sounds like a real tragic read, I know, but the thing that I found restorative about it, apart from the fact that just, God, the pace of the writing is so beautiful. Like, so for instance, Susie Boyd, the writer, will go into this sort of like, Ruth is a sort of slightly nervous person. She's a teacher. She sort of says bossy things to the girls that she teaches and then regrets it. She sort of feels dowdy. She looks at other people and think, why am I not like that? Why am I unlovable? And, you know, like she's sort of spiky-ish.
Right. What age?
I guess she's probably in her 60s by the time you meet her. And she's very particular, and she hates that about herself. Like, she hates the fact that she puts on a sort of smiley, dumb face when she runs into her daughter, and she'll start doing the dishes in this sort of, you know, filthy flat where her daughter lives, even though she knows that it annoys her daughter. Right. Like, so it's like, it's all sort of button pushing too about like mothers and daughters. But she just will have like 6 paragraphs of very deep sort of self-loathing kind of, why am I like this, from Ruth. And then she'll snap out with this incredibly light-handed description that takes you back into the action. So, for instance, at the christening of Lily, Ruth, the grandma, turns up, and Eleanor and her partner show up with the baby. They're stoned. They're nodding off. The person that they've nominated to be the godparent has passed out. And there's this priest who surveys all of this horror and sort of looks at Ruth and can see, you know, how tormented she is. And the priest then makes an appearance later on in the book too, which is quite magical. But so there's this long passage where Ruth is thinking about how she's been as a parent and how she's going to transact this moment, and it's very intense. And then the next line is, I don't know why this, like, the next line is, the light was lacy in the cathedral. Oh. So it's just this beautiful little kind of dismount. Anyway, it's
perfect description too. Like, I visualised right then from those few words exactly
the light was
what the
lacy
light
in the
like.
cathedral. Yeah. So there you're back out of her brain and back into this sort of rolling scene.
Yeah, that's very clever, isn't it?
Yeah. And
because you've noticed that because you're a writer and you're paying attention. If you were just being carried along by the story, you just would have been out of her internal mood back into the scene without noticing.
But it's just like, just the ear of this writer, it's amazing. And also, every now and again, she'll say something absolutely shocking. So, like, look, hey, people get older and they die. Ruth gets very ill at the end of the book, and there's this bit where, you know, she's again, you know, sort of surveying her life's accounts, and, you know, and then she just says, because she's in hospital, she's got cancer, and she goes, and then there's my hands. I used to actually quite like my hands, but now they're fucked. It's just this kind of like every now and again there's just like a note where you just go, oh.
You can't always be thinking deep thoughts just because you're in a profound, deep moment of your life.
Right, I know. There's just these tonal
crap.
little shifts and drops that are really, anyway, absolutely terrific book.
Just that point about good writing made me think of... so this is going to... massive spoiler alert here for One Day. If you haven't watched One Day yet on Netflix... just keep spooling forward every 15 seconds till you get past this bit, because there is a big spoiler alert coming here, but a big spoiler coming, but I can't talk about what I want to talk about without spoiling. So that's given you enough time now to push a bit forwards. Okay, so One Day, you know the film Past Lives, which you've also seen, and
I haven't seen it.
Oh,
yet.
You still haven't seen it?
No, I still
oh,
haven't seen
God.
it.
Okay.
I'm just not seeing it to annoy you now.
Okay, so Past Lives, I think, is like a perfect piece of writing. And One Day, I did enjoy One Day until the point at which Dex and Em get together, because at that point I feel like, well, this is extremely predictable now. And the final, or the second last episode where she's riding the bike, you just know they're all so happy and everything's so great, and you just know, well, there's got to be disaster coming. Sure enough, she gets hit on the bike, and then what happens is the point at which the two characters have been circling each other for all these years, and it's these missed opportunities of getting together. In Past Lives, that happens without resolution, basically. Yeah. In One Day, they resolve it by them getting together and realising, oh, we loved each other all along, and now we're together, and now we're just so blissfully happy. And then the only place left for that to go is
it's, like,
it's not happy. Yeah,
it's not happy at all.
And so then
here comes a postie van.
So by letting the characters get together, what you've ended up doing is created this situation where it has to be a happily ever after, which feels kind of just a bit predictable. Or you have to undercut it by having a tragedy and getting rid of one of them, which is the choice. But then what that leaves you with for the whole final episode is just Dexter moping around feeling sorry for himself, which is actually incredibly boring. And
I didn't watch till the end.
Exactly, because you just... How far did you watch? Where did you watch up to?
I got to him spiralling back into just, alcoholism
after
and
she
stuff.
died.
Yeah,
exactly, because you just know, like...
I assume it doesn't improve.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but what made it work to that point was because the tension was created by the fact that they weren't a couple, and they had this kind of interesting relationship where you could never quite tell if they were in love with each other or not. Whereas Past Lives, it feels more authentic because life doesn't usually end up as neatly as how One Day tied it up, right? So Past Lives is more complex about how things unfold. And so, therefore, I think Past Lives is a better piece of writing.
Was One Day... wasn't a book, was it?
It was.
Oh, was
it?
it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I had read it, but I had forgotten by the time I watched the show.
because last time we talked about it, you're like, I feel like something terrible happens. I'm like, I couldn't.
Yeah, I couldn't. I just had... That was all I could remember, that I just thought, I think something bad happens at some point. I can't quite recall.
But why is it that, people... the question of endings of books is divisive, right? Like, so for instance, in that book that we both read and really enjoyed, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
I didn't love it that much, actually, but I found it okay.
You
loved it.
I loved it, yeah.
Yeah.
You suck. So you'll watch... You seriously will watch a Ryan Reynolds movie about a video game, but not a novel about one.
Yeah, I did read it.
Yeah.
It actually reminded me a bit of One Day in some ways. It's interesting that you raised it, because it is...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my daughter who loved it...
Yeah, I remember. That's what prompted me to read it, actually.
Yeah. Unhappy with the ending. But why is it, like, so... You know how there's that sort of happy ending, sad ending thing, the Hollywood ending... in any kind of sort of cinema release movie that is a romantic thing, if a couple breaks up, it's because one of them's an asshole and gets what he or she had coming or whatever.
Yeah.
And then they'll find, and if the person that's been dumped is a nice person, then they'll meet someone at the wedding. So why is it that, I don't know, do you think that there is more of a tension and more of a compelling tension in leaving things unresolved than having them end in a pat way, if it's supposed to be more of an arty sort of thing?
I think so, except that because I think it's more authentic to life, but then I think often we go to art to escape from life.
Yeah.
And so the appeal
also, I don't think it's authentic to life, really. I mean...
You don't think things get resolved?
Happy endings?
I think sometimes there's happy endings, but I think the course of a life, you can't map a narrative on that life until it ends, because you impose the narrative retrospectively. And so then you think, oh, well, actually my life was about, well, like Jodie Foster going, well, it turns out you're my person. She didn't think in the whole of Naiad.
Oh, my whole life I've known you were my person. It's just like...
It just suddenly dawns on her, like, I think this person might die tomorrow, and if they die, they're my person. Like, so I think life, it's very unclear what the plot of your life is or the meaning of your life until you look backwards over it.
That's true. But also it's not really a lab level of experiment, is it? Because it's changing all the time. Like, I mean, you make one decision and then you, like, I don't know, like you compensate for things that are missing in some areas of your life by kind of, you know,
pulling other levers.
Yeah.
I'm reading this interesting book at the moment called The Happiness Curve by Jonathan Rauch.
Okay.
And it's kind of...
I think I've read that.
I actually think it's kind of...
Self-help books, okay.
Self-help books. I've got a couple of self-help books to go through. Oh,
fantastic.
So this one is... We've all read the article, which is about this theory, which is life. It's shaped... Your level of happiness is like a smile, which is in midlife it goes down and you're at your most unhappy in the middle of your life, and then it picks back up from about the mid-50s onwards, and then you become happier, and your happiness actually returns to similar levels to when you're in your 20s. And so the book kind of unpacks why that is the case. And one of the interesting things, I mean, it kind of reads like it probably was a great 3,000-word Atlantic article that's been stretched a bit to fit a book. I'm not quite sure.
Has it got graphs? I'm pretty sure it's got graphs.
Yeah, it's got graphs, yeah. I'm not... Lots of graphs.
I finished it. I was like, oh, that's a draw anyway. So.
Yeah, totally. But one of the points is it talks about expectations. And so when you're young, what they discover is you have expectations for here's how your life's going to turn out. And then reality is harder often than what your expectations are. This is generalising, of course, because some people's life exceeds expectations. Yeah. So we're talking about the kind of average.
The median kind of experience.
Yeah. So for most people, they think, I've got these expectations, I'm going to be a great film director, or I'm going to be this, or I'm going to have kids, or whatever, I'm going to get married, and then they don't get married or have kids or be a great film director. And so then reality bites, and so your happiness gets low because your expectations are unfulfilled. But at a certain point, and this peaks in the middle of your life, right? Yeah. Because you've got regrets about the past, but you also fear that the future is going to be just more disappointment and more of the same, and so you get stuck in this kind of middle-aged slump. But then what happens is...
Also, you're not getting enough sleep as either, like you're just annoying kids.
Exactly.
If you did
you've got responsibilities.
And then you're worrying about your elderly parents.
Exactly. So you've got... But then what happens is once you hit...
ear hair, you know.
Once you hit middle life, your expectations, life has battered optimistic expectations out of you, and so therefore... you don't have very high expectations. So suddenly reality and life starts to exceed your expectations, and that results in an uptick in your happiness because now you've got more realistic assessment.
Expectations low is, I mean, it's such a key, I think, to life.
But a lot of the research shows that some of these things are not within your control. There's certain impulses we've got that tend to lead you towards certain things. Because obviously there's a thing called the optimism bias, which is if we were all completely hopeless about everything, so we always got surprised on the upside, everyone would be just deeply depressed. So you can't kind of live like that. So we have this slight optimism bias. Anyway, it's very interesting. But obviously at any point in anyone's life, they have this formula. I won't be able to remember all the bits of it. There's 4 different elements about what contributes to your happiness at any one time. One of them is obviously your set point, because you have a personality that makes you a more optimistic or a more pessimistic person. And that's a thing, a lot of research has gone into that, but it's harder to budge. There's life circumstances and just the hand of cards that you've been dealt by things that are often out of your control. There's decisions that you make that are within your control about, you know, are you going to spend time with your friends today, or are you going to sit on computer games all day or whatever? And then the author of this book says that the other thing which objectively has an impact is time, because as you get older and you age, this thing that I mentioned about expectations kind of kicks in, and so you just tend to... the passage of time tends to make you happier. You move through the unhappy bit. Anyway, it's interesting. I feel kind of like I've hit the point with it where I'm like, yeah, I get the point. I'm in an unhappy patch and I'll get happy soon. I actually am in quite a happy patch. I think I'm through the bottom of the curve. I'm actually very content, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of it surely is, I mean, if we can get sort of invasive for a minute, like, you know, you had quite a crazy life for more than 10 years of starting work at 6 o'clock in the morning, also having little kids and not finishing until 8 p.m. and having then also just a lot of people asking you to do a lot of stuff, and plus being on television every day and then just like that's nuts. And then your dad died. So like, yeah, okay, that's a lot.
And a marriage breakdown. Yeah, but also
like, I mean, that's a time thing too. And I think that the bottom of the happiness curve, which is where you're either, I mean, if you have children, you're kind of either not sleeping because they're little, or you're worrying because they're, depressed or anxious, or, whatever. And then you've got aging relatives around you and so on. But I think when you said that time is a factor, I think not just in a linear sense, also your access to time is a factor, because even in the last year or two, when you've had time to start learning the cello, and look, I've paid for that, I reckon, in a very deep way, because you now have time to pursue all the stupid ideas that you kind of used to have and just put in your crazy little notebook, and now you're doing them, like making me, go on tour with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and like, I love it. I'm here for it because I like variety. But also, I mean, that sort of stuff. And look, I'm not saying, hey guys, how to get happy, just wedge your way into the Australian Chamber Orchestra, because obviously it takes a special brand of maniac to be able to do that. But like, yeah, having more time to go deeper into the friendships that you have, I think is
definitely
good.
Well, there's all the other factors too about the things in life that kind of make you happy. I mean, the other two sort of self-helpy things, it's funny how the universe just tends to lead you down a path at a certain point, and you find I feel like I'm reading.
You got stuck in the self-help aisle.
Yeah, I did. I clearly did.
What is it that draws you to a self-help book? Is it like...
Well, the one that's kicked this off just happened to be sitting on my thing because someone had sent it to me. A publisher had sent it. It was A Therapeutic Journey by Alain de Botton.
Oh, de Botton. You pushed Le Botton.
I think it's pronounced de Botton. I remember interviewing Alain de Botton.
Yeah.
So he...
Poussez le botton.
Publishers sometimes send us a book and it was sent. And I don't mind his writing because he writes in this very cold, clinical sort of style, but about emotional things. It's like he kind of steps back almost in a as an observer or something. Anyway, A Therapeutic Journey is basically about what therapy teaches you, but he's kind of distilled the lessons of therapy. Oh, okay. And so it's kind of obvious stuff that we all know, but it helps to be reminded of. Like, it's good to be in the moment and to find things that you enjoy. He's big on not immersing in the news and just why. Why do you care about things happening on the other side of the world that you have no control over? That's a recipe for unhappiness, blah, 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 blah. And he, of course, because he's a
hell of a way to be a global citizen.
Of course, because he's an educated British dude. He quotes Voltaire to back this argument.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and also, he's never going to be in the trenches when they're,
Yeah. He's an interesting dude. But look, I found that an engaging read, but mostly because it just reminded me, that's right, you're investing time with your friends and stuff like that's where your source of your happiness comes from, basically, those kind of, and also just noticing and appreciating, like, someone brought us a lovely jug of water in here today, and it actually looks quite pretty, that jug of water sitting there, right? Yeah. So just noticing things like that and taking pleasure where you can get it.
Did you ever read, did I send you that, like, just piercingly beautiful thing that Helen Garner wrote for, I think, The Guardian, actually, a year or two ago, about the nature of happiness.
Yeah,
and it was on turning 80.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most, I mean, it's Garner, so it's fabulous and full of just, she said that she's learned later in life that you kind of spend half your life waiting for happiness to arrive, as if it's going to, like, show up with all of the trumpets blazing and sort of a big sort of flashing lights and stuff. And she says the thing about happiness is you're in it for a while and you don't realise until it sort of ends, and then you kind of realise that you've been in it for a bit and then you're out of it for a bit. And she said that in her later years, she said, I'm going to settle for moments of extreme interestingness.
Yeah.
It's such a lovely piece of writing.
I mean, a bit like when we were talking before about hindsight and the narrative of your life. I think sometimes you realise, that was such a happy day in hindsight. Like I remember once saying to you and Jeremy, we were on holidays with our children and we'd gone to someone's house in the morning for like a brunch kind of thing. And it was just a very, very pleasant day in a lovely location. But nothing particularly exciting happened. Yeah. They just cooked some nice food. We tootled around on their property. We walked down the road to the beach. We drove 45 minutes to get there. We drove 45 minutes to get home. When we got back to the house, Jeremy poured us a glass of wine, and I said, I know this is going to sound like I'm overstating it, but I think this has been one of the best days of my life. And to my great relief, you both said, it has been. Like, yes. And then we all kind of talked about why has this day been so fantastic? But it was kind of like, I knew at the time that I was doing it, I was having a good time. But I think it's funny how sometimes it doesn't, I mean, obviously I've had amazing days in my life where something amazing's happened, right? Like I've met Paul McCartney. That's one of the great days of my life too.
You interviewed him. Because I never really picked that up.
Also one of the happiest days of my life. But would I say that the day of meeting Paul McCartney was happier than the day of having breakfast with you and Jerry? Yeah, I would actually. End of story. No, I'm joking. But
I know why that day was really happy. I remember it. And as soon as you said that, I remember you saying that. And I thought, yes. And it's because, and this is going to sound irrelevant, but I was rereading the other day an old Malcolm Gladwell article about tomato ketchup.
Oh, that's a great one.
It's a great
that's
article,
one of the all-time
right?
greats.
Yeah. And he talks about, like, it's kind of like basically about why Heinz ketchup is just doggedly the most.
Look it up if you've never read it, people. It's a great read.
It's a terrific, and it's because the recipe kind of contains, and he says this is true of Coca-Cola as well, these sorts of just incredibly minutely calibrated points of amplitude, uses this term amplitude. So like, you know, a spicy note that's offset by a sweet note, that's so you get everything, but you can't explain why it's so delicious, right? And I think that day there was sort of new people, new landscape, old people, and then we caught some food, we had some incredible food, we saw and heard some great anecdotes.
The kids were having a fun day.
Kids were having an amazing time. And then we went home and cooked the food that we'd caught, and the kids got right into it. And, you know, and so I think there was this amplitude of just, you know.
Quite right. It was probably a combo of things. But it did nonetheless.
Even though none of them individually was sort of like, oh my God, let me tell you about this.
It wasn't a remarkable day by any stretch.
It was pretty remarkable.
It was pretty remarkable. But it was, nonetheless, the things that made it a happy day were not in and of themselves necessarily remarkable.
Yeah.
Like, because nothing all the things that we're saying made it remarkable were kind of ordinary things. I'm being a bit oblique here. I'm not going to name the person, but it was a famous person's house that we were at, but the source of the joy didn't actually come from meeting that person. It just came from the activities and the company and the just
and everything
vibe.
Being right.
Yeah.
And nothing being awkward or kind of I don't know.
It was lovely.
We were at the Rock's house, guys. We went to the Rock's house.
I'd always wanted to meet the Rock. It made me very happy. So just back to the Malcolm Gladwell article, the thing that, if I'm thinking of the correct article, one of the things that I loved in that was, you know, this secret combination of ingredients that makes the perfect flavour, that there's these people in America who are professional palate people.
I just want to know all about them.
It's incredible. And they are the sought after ones are the kind of middle American palate. You don't want the people that the Michelin star palate. You want the people that have the taste, which tells you what most Americans are going to go for. And so I forget where these people are who have this particular palate, and that's their job. They're professional tasters, and they'll taste it and they'll go, not sweet enough or not sour enough or whatever it is, and they can identify the note that's missing in a recipe.
Cool. And that person will just never have a cigarette in their whole life, right?
And they just know, and you're just like, okay, we got this new product, we've got to get Annabelle Crabb in because we've got to get her.
Imagine if you were just like,
it's amazing.
The mayonnaise expert. If you're doing mayonnaise, you've got to get Lee Sales. Yeah. I mean, just fly her in, chop her in, mate.
Fried chicken.
Praise is in crisis. Like, what about peri-peri or not? I mean, wasabi, does it go in?
On the just before we get off the self-help thing, there's one other thing that I watched.
I've got some self-helpy stuff too.
Oh, great. Okay.
FYI.
One other thing I'd recommend, I won't spend too long on it. It's a documentary on Netflix that I just stumbled across called Stutz. It's made by...
Oh, I've watched this.
Oh, you've watched it as well?
Yeah,
okay.
I've watched it.
Made by Jonah Hill.
Unbelievable camera work.
It was such an interesting thing.
So this is Jonah Hill and his therapist.
Jonah Hill, the actor, basically films sessions with his therapist where he's kind of talking to the therapist about what he does, and the premise is I found you so helpful in helping me become more content in my life. And I want to help share this with other people. So I'm going to record some of our sessions and I'm going to ask you about your philosophies and how you approach therapy with the view of helping other people. And then over the course of it, they kind of realise, well, we have to have actually some intimate conversations here to show people how we break down ideas, which they're both kind of a little bit closed to initially and then they roll with it. It was excellent.
Yeah. I think also just the way it was shot, and it is so central to the appeal of that film, I think, because was it a series? I can't remember.
It was a film. Yeah.
Because it's completely pared back, right? Like it's just two dudes talking.
Yep.
And I started off not liking it. Like I was just like, oh God, this is a bit indulgent, Jonah Hill. I don't care about your stupid problems. What do you mean those like hide expensive cameras to talk to you? Bloody annoying. And then I don't know. There's something about the texture of the faces and the cutaways that they've used, because it's sort of black and white, isn't it? Or it's got the feeling of black and white. I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought you were maybe going to say that you got hooked in when Jonah Hill said, I feel the film isn't working. And it's because there's too much artifice. And so I'm, like, for example, we're filming this 6 months after we filmed the last bit, so I'm wearing a wig because I'm in the middle of a film role, and he pulls, so we have to have continuity, but it feels fake, and he takes it off and he's got different. I thought you were going to say then you felt more hooked into it.
No, I think look, to be honest, I think that it's probably my own biases. I was just like, oh God,
listen to some
this
actor
movie
bang on
star
about
thinks he's interesting and these problems are interesting, and his therapist's interesting too. Amazing, God, shut up. And then I'm like, oh, actually, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
On the self-help front, this is not a self-help book, but a book that I have read and loved recently is Nadine van Cohen's novel, which is called Everyone and Everything. I think I read recently that it's been optioned for movie rights or something. Anyway, but it's about this young woman, Yale, who's going through this sort of severe depressive episode. She's basically stuck in her apartment. She has attempted self-harm. She's got a sister. Her mum died and she's completely bereft without her mother. And she starts going to do ocean swimming at the ocean pool, one of them in, Coogee or somewhere like that. And she meets this older woman there, and she's just so broken and spiky, and she gradually starts talking to this woman. And there's something so sticky and kind of beautiful about it, because it isn't a story lurching in search of a happy ending, but it is about being in a very dark place and sort of finding that like cracks of light appear without you first even really noticing them at all. Like, anyway.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So then you suddenly one day realise, oh, I'm happier, but you didn't notice it creeping in.
Yeah. And I think that one of the really pernicious things about depression is that if you're in the middle of it, you can't even lift a tiny finger, which is why I always like that "And That's What I Reckon" video, where, because every now and again he does a video about depression, his struggles with depression. And I remember he did a great video once where he's just like, so champions, just going to say, anybody who's out there who's depressed, and if you're like even have got to the point where you're watching something on TV and you're watching this, good on you. Like, who cares if you haven't gone for a run today, or you haven't whatever, you're interacting with something, fucking good on you. Anyway, it's this really good understanding of what that kind of mindset is like. And Nadine van Cohen is a very funny person, but I think in this novel, and there's a lot of funny stuff in it, like it's very observant, very sharp and funny about families, but also her ability to kind of move through these depths of mood with real grace is terrific book. Really love it.
Sorry to be a pain in the neck, but
are we out of time?
Yeah. And I got to get going.
Oh God. All right.
Sorry,
well, I had another couple of books to talk about, but I'll do that next
for next time.
All right. Okay.
See you all soon.
Thanks. This has been amazing. You're a great therapist. Did we film this?
Thank you very much for listening or watching. You can find more of our content on YouTube, or if you don't like to look at our faces, and let's face it, that would be fair enough, you can listen to us on Spotify or wherever else you choose.